I'm Suzy Deyoung with the Sandy Hook Promise. I'm here with Dr. John Woodall, founder of the Unity Project, in the third of our series of videos. In the last one, we talked about how trauma will impact intimate relationships. Now, Dr. Woodall is going to discuss how it can affect our children and our parenting and our reactions and their reactions, how we can turn those into strengths. I'm familiar with a number of kids who worry that they might be like the aggressor because they are either isolated or feeling isolated, or because they feel angry sometimes and they wonder if they could do something bad.
Right. I'm actually happy to hear that kind of a comment from a child, because it means that they're reflective, they're thinking about their inner world, they're thinking about their inner life, and they're trying to ask themselves, am I measuring up? It's that part of it's the good part. I would say to the child like that, I'm happy to hear that you want to do the right thing, right? So that in that concern is the seed of a sense of responsibility, right?
That's great.
And so that's what we're talking about when we say that buried in what we would know, what a psychiatrist is supposed to call a symptom, is actually the seed of a strength. And I wanted to mention another point. We live in a culture that you're not ever supposed to have any bad feelings, right? If you have a bad feeling, there's something wrong with you. And this is really a noxious idea. We talk about grieving as if it were like a cold. You know, are you over your cold? Are you over your grief? It's been a week. It's been a month. It's been as if it has a beginning and an end. And if it goes on too long, there's something wrong with you.
You know, there's some cultures where people are allowed to grieve for a year, right? Isn't that?
Well, it's so true, isn't it? And well, allowed. It's what is grief? You know, to me, grief is kind of a proof of our love. You know, we only grieve the things that we love when they're gone, right? So to ask someone to stop grieving is like asking them to stop loving. So we shouldn't have this notion that there's something bad or wrong or pathological about feeling badly about our love being missing. The question becomes, what do we do with that love? You know, we have to find another form for it.
Yes.
So as that's moving along, there's a lot of emotional responses we can have that we need to kind of visit to get their meaning from, so that we find different forms of love in these symptoms, in these things that doctors like to call symptoms. So you had
So with the children, I have heard from many people in town that children are terrified. They're unable to sleep alone, or they're sleeping with baseball bats.
Right.
How do we address that fear and turn that fear into something different?
It's poignant. It's hard for a parent to see something like that. Let's talk about how fear holds within it a potential strength. And in the time that we have in these videos, we won't be able to go through all of the ways to manage these things. But I'm hoping to give kind of a framework for thinking about any of these problems we see that our kids are going through in a way that empowers us to think that there's a strength in there. So when we see fear, naturally we want to comfort our child. We want to reassure them that they're safe within the family, that yes, sometimes bad things happen, but right now in this relationship in the family, they are safe, and you're going to work together to be safe. But also to let them know that when they're afraid, what they're really telling you is that they are valuing life, right? Because you're only afraid of the loss of something you value, right? So it's telling you something about how precious life is. So that's kind of a little jujitsu you do with the language. You're afraid because you think life is precious. So now what do we do to make life precious in our family? How do we help each other enjoy and celebrate and live life fully, right? So it's like turning the fear on its head.
And the anger I hear a lot of children are.
Anger, and of the horror and the injustice of this act and our sense of powerlessness over it. This is a tricky one, because anger tends to make our sense of identity get smaller, right? So it's important that we help a child see that this desire or this feeling of anger, the seed of the strength in it is the desire to have the world be fair, you know, and it's the desire to commit yourself to fairness, to justice in the world. So it's important to help the child move that sense of anger into something larger, where it's not just fairness for me or fairness for a small group, but how do we commit ourselves to fairness in the world? It's kind of it's an ethical stretch.
Yes.
Because the pull is to make the anger wants to make us feel smaller. And so our job as parents is to make that sense of justice go bigger.
And I would think that would help with the powerlessness a lot of children.
With the sense of
feeling.
powerlessness. And of course it depends on the age of the child too, doesn't it? But again, we could go over very specific things, and perhaps in the talk on the 11th and the workshops we're hoping to conduct, that we can go into more detail on how specifically to manage some of these things.
How about children who have lost friends and who are anguished over that? They're, to parent while you yourself are suffering from what happened, but to also have your child. I know some people whose kids are struggling. And there's, in some ways, there's no reprieve from the anguish of loss. That is our lot when we lose someone close to us. And it's painful for parents to watch. But we've already seen so many wonderful examples in town of kids creating memorials, kids making themselves, or putting themselves out there in some way to help other needy kids. We really want to encourage that. It's love looking for a new form. I loved my friend, and now I've got to keep that love alive. My friend was really funny, so I'm going to put on a magic show that's funny. So you take that thing you loved in your friend and you keep it alive in something you do. Right? I have a friend who has shared with me that she's having a very hard time. Although she didn't lose anybody close to her, she's feeling very distraught and anxious, and it bothers her. She's feeling that way, but she has said to me, what right do I have to feel that way? I didn't lose anybody. Yeah.
This goes back to that idea about that we're not supposed to grieve too much because it's bad to grieve. There's something wrong with me if I grieve, or maybe in my family it's not appropriate to grieve. A lot of times the people who are telling us, they're get over it, they're more worried about their anxiety than your anxiety. They want you to stop grieving because it makes them nervous, right? They're not really helping you. So we have to understand again that grief is a form of love. So she's anxious because it sounds to me like she's a very sensitive person, a very empathic person. The suffering of another person affects her.
Yes, and it's affected her parenting as well. She's having a difficult time parenting because she feels so guilty that she's upset about the event that it's
and the
coming
guilt
through.
And she feels guilt because she thinks it's a bad thing that she's empathic. I think we should just reframe it and say it's probably the greatest lesson she's teaching her kids is empathy. So instead of feeling guilty, she should just talk about how hurt she is about the loss of these beautiful children, and that and maybe talk with the kids about a way to put that empathy into some good use in the community.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I would say she's a good person. She's the kind of person I'd like to know.
We've discussed how this impacts our kids. In our next video, we're going to discuss how this response to trauma plays out in our community and within the organizations in our community. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Suzy.